From The Times and The Sunday Times, this is The Story. I'm Luke Jones. Another hard-fought right in the United States, the land of the free, is starting to look uncertain. The right to same-sex marriage in the US goes back over a decade to a man called James Obergefell and his terminally ill partner, John Arthur.
John was one of the funniest, most well-spoken and charming people I've ever known. He was the love of my life.
John was diagnosed with ALS. The typical time frame is 2.5 to 5 years before death.
As time ran out for John, they decided to get married. But living in Ohio, that was illegal. So to get hitched, they had to hop on a plane to Maryland, where it was legal.
We took an ambulance to the airport in Cincinnati and we boarded this small medical jet and we flew to Baltimore, Washington International Airport. And our wedding ceremony took place in the airplane.
Jim, you have the rings?
Yes. The most important thing was I got to take John's hand and we got to say the words we had wanted to say for so long. With this ring, I thee wed.
With this ring, I thee wed.
We'd been together almost 21 years at that point, and it changed everything.
But back home in Ohio, they realised that on John's unfortunately looming death certificate, their marriage would not be recognised. James would not be listed as a spouse. So they did what any good American does when they're not happy with something. They sued.
8 days after we got married, we filed a lawsuit in federal district court demanding that Ohio recognize our lawful Maryland marriage on John's death certificate when he died. We had a simple decision to make. Were we willing to fight for our relationship? And it was a really easy yes for us.
Their arguments against Ohio's law made its way through the system until it was finally heard right at the top at the Supreme Court. And
the court has just ruled part of that law is unconstitutional. This is being described as a big win for supporters of same-sex marriage.
Today's ruling felt inevitable. It was, nonetheless, the greatest expansion of marriage since the 1967 decision that struck down bans on interracial matrimony. It was a clear and historic declaration.
But with the federal right to abortion already gone, and some parts of the US political sphere and Supreme Court itching to maybe go further, might marriage equality be killed off? The story today: could the US scrap same-sex marriage?
My name's Matilda Davies. I'm a data journalist at The Times and The Sunday Times, and I've been here for about 4 years now.
And what got you onto this?
It's something that I have a personal interest in. I am engaged to be married to my girlfriend.
Congratulations.
Now fiancé, which is very exciting.
When's the big day?
Not for a while, probably 2 years yet.
2 years?
We're buying a house at the moment. There's a lot to do in between.
Fair enough.
So it's something I'm very personally interested in, and being a bit of a data nerd. Since Trump's first presidency, I've been following what opinion on gay marriage has been like in the US and following what that trend has looked like. Over the last few years, I've been really quite shocked at where the trend is going.
So more than a decade ago, before the Supreme Court got involved, the case was what? You could get married as a gay couple in some states and not others.
Yeah, exactly. So pre-2015, it was down to the states whether they wanted to provide same-sex marriage licenses or not. So places like Massachusetts have been marrying same-sex couples since 2004, but there was 20 or so states that weren't offering it before this amazing ruling in 2015, which made it into a federal law. So everywhere had to offer it.
And how did that come about?
So it came about in this case called Obergefell v. Hodges, which essentially what happened, there was a gay couple, James Obergefell, and his long-term partner was dying. They decided they wanted to get married, but they lived in Ohio where same-sex marriage wasn't legal. So they ended up having to fly to another state where they got married.
Through the generosity of our family and friends, They covered the cost of a chartered medical jet, and I got to take his hand and we got to say, I do. That was all we wanted. We just wanted to get married. We wanted John to die a married man. I wanted to be able to call myself his husband, his widower, and have it mean something.
And with the respect of the law of our great land, I now pronounce you husband and husband, forever intertwined partners.
Then his partner died, but he wasn't allowed to be on the death certificate because their marriage wasn't recognized.
Back in Ohio.
Back in Ohio, in their home state. So he took his case to the Supreme Court and campaigned to get gay marriage legalized across the country and was ultimately successful in 2015.
And around 2015, the public in the US broadly thought what?
They did support gay marriage for the most part. The support was a lot less widespread than it is now. It has gone up massively since the ruling, but there was still quite widespread support for gay marriage.
That ruling in 2015, what did the judges say? I mean, was it close? What can you tell us about that decision?
There are 9 justices on the Supreme Court. Obergefell went through by 5 votes to 4.
So close.
So it was very close, yes.
There's now a lot of chatter that the federal right to same-sex marriage might be overturned back at the Supreme Court. Where does that concern come from?
So I think a lot of the concern started when Roe v. Wade was overturned.
Thank you for joining us on this Friday night on a day that changed America. We're outside the Supreme Court after the landmark decision that overturned Roe versus Wade and ended a woman's constitutional right to an abortion.
It was kind of settled in 1973.
The other major story today is the decision of the United States Supreme Court. It handed down a historic decision about abortion. The court said in a 7-2 decision that in the first 3 months of pregnancy, only the woman and her physician may decide whether she may have an abortion.
Well, it means that January 22nd, 1973 will stand out as one of the great days for freedom and free choice. This allows a woman free choice as whether or not to remain pregnant. This is extraordinary.
So I think it sent huge shockwaves through the American public. That was taken away from them overnight. That definitely ignited a lot of fear in people in the US that other rulings could go the same way. And actually, in the Supreme Court ruling for that, Clarence Thomas, who's one of the more conservative justices on the court, said outright that he thinks we should be revisiting other cases, Obergefell included, but also including the right to contraception and same-sex intercourse and things like that as well.
So how might this question actually return to the justices to reconsider?
Essentially, the case is coming back to the Supreme Court in autumn, and they will, at that point, decide whether to take the case to a full trial.
10 years after the Supreme Court ruled in favor of same-sex marriage across the United States, it could now be overturned.
That essentially came about because this woman called Kim Davis, who used to be a county clerk in Kentucky, when the original ruling came through in 2015, she refused outright to issue gay marriage licenses when it became federal law, saying that it was part of her religious freedoms. She didn't believe in it. She wasn't going to issue licenses, which was obviously against the law. She ended up serving a very short prison sentence and was fined hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Her counsel in this petition, which was filed last week, says that decision was egregiously wrong. And if that sounds familiar, that's the same type of argument that was made by opponents of abortion when they sought to overturn Roe versus Wade just a few years ago. So a lot of eyes on this petition.
And so she's been in this kind of 10-year legal battle against her conviction. And yeah, now it's finally reached the Supreme Court. So in the autumn, they will decide whether or not they want to take the case forward and actually consider overturning Obergefell.
And she's an interesting character.
She is an interesting character. She's been vilified by a lot of the gay community, and there has been a lot of commentary about whether she upholds the sanctity of marriage in her own life. She's been married and divorced several times.
Kim Davis, the infamous former Kentucky clerk who went to jail in 2015 for refusing to issue marriage licenses to LGBTQ couples. She is back in the news this week, formally asking the Supreme Court to overturn marriage equality. Lady, You've been married 4 times to 3 different people, and you want to lecture us on the sanctity of marriage?
So yeah, she's a fascinating person.
And if we spool forward and imagine that this Supreme Court ruling is reversed, what would that just simply mean for people in the US?
It differs depending on what state you're in. So if Obergefell was overturned, it would send the legislation back to the states to decide. There's still about 16 states where same-sex marriage is protected, so they would continue to offer same-sex marriage licenses, but there are 25 who have these zombie laws, which will come into effect if the federal law is taken away, which essentially will immediately ban same-sex marriages in the state. So there was also this legislation that Biden brought in 2022, the Respect for Marriage Act, which means that even if Obergefell is overturned, states will have to recognize current marriages. So anyone in a same-sex couple who's already been married in their state, even if it becomes illegal to get married in the state, their marriage will continue to be recognized, but new marriages may not be issued.
Yes. So actually, is there anyone necessarily calling for this to be overturned?
Yeah, so there are definitely a lot of groups in the United States that are openly calling for gay marriage to be overturned, a number of the justices on the court itself, but also groups like the Southern Baptist Convention, which is the largest Protestant organization in the States, have called for gay marriage to be overturned. And it's certainly clear from the data that Republicans are losing support for gay marriage. And this is, becoming a more popular and accepted stance.
And how credible are some people taking this threat, gay couples, that this right might be taken away at some point, at least in some states?
So I think because of what happened with Roe v. Wade, people are taking it incredibly seriously. There are a lot of high-profile figures who were also encouraging people to take this seriously.
It took 50 years to overturn Roe v. Wade. The Supreme Court will hear a case about gay marriage. My prediction is they will do to gay marriage what they did to abortion. They will send it back to the states.
Hillary Clinton said quite starkly to LGBT people that they should absolutely get married as soon as they can.
Anybody in a committed relationship out there in the LGBTQ community, you ought to consider getting married, because I don't think they'll undo existing marriages, but I fear that they will undo the national right.
And is that likely?
Depends who you ask, I think. So in order for them to actually reconsider Obergefell, 4 justices on the courts have to agree that it's worth doing, which is perhaps unlikely. They hear about 8,000 of these cases a year. They take forward only about 70 of them. But there still is that fear because of the right-wing nature of lots of the justices now that it is certainly a possibility. I spoke to one woman in Massachusetts who's now running wedding marathons for same-sex couples so that they can just quickly get married, ensure that they have those rights going forward.
My name is Christina Pascucci Ciampa. I'm the founder and owner of All She Wrote Books. So All She Wrote Books is Boston's only queer feminist bookstore. We are 6 years old. We have grown and really kind of connected with the community. Alongside that, we've also celebrated engagements in our stores. We've had, so many beautiful experiences of love in the store with so many different couples. And so we launched that in October of last year, so October of 2024. Mm-hmm. And we had gotten inquiries and we have weddings scheduled out. And then when this Supreme Court news kind of came up, the person who was doing the elopement ceremony and the photography was like, "You saw what happened today, right?" I was like, "Yeah, I saw. It's not great. It's very bad." And she was like, "I know you want to do something." And I said, "Yes, I do." I was like, "Well, what does your schedule look like for the next 2 weeks? Like, what can we do?" And she was like, "Well, what if we did kind of like a wedding marathon at the bookstore?" And I was like, "That sounds amazing." And she's like, "Will you be willing to make your cupcakes?" And I said, "Yes, I would."
Here today to celebrate the love and commitment that Tiffany and Jessica share. Over the years, They have grown together, building a foundation of trust, laughter, and devotion.
I promise to listen to you, and I vow to tell you how much I love you every single day. I give you this ring as a symbol of my love and commitment to you. Today, we honor their journey and we witness their union as they step into this new chapter as wife and wife.
Before you kind of decided to put on this event, did you see, do you think, an uptick of interest in either your friends wanting to get married or people wanting to come to your shop to get married kind of after Trump was elected or anything like that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we definitely saw an uptick for sure. We definitely got a ton of inquiries starting in the beginning of the year. Because, yeah, the thing was, well, look at what happened to Roe v. Wade. What's next? And so, of course, you may be thinking, well, it hasn't reached the Supreme Court yet. They haven't made a decision yet, so I don't need to worry. But honestly, you look at what historically has happened, the odds are bad. They're very, very bad. And you have justices that have specifically written about tearing that apart. And so by not necessarily reacting also concerns me as well. It sounds crazy and it's it can be a lot, but I think it's just really, really important because, again, this unpredictability with this current administration is just scary and it's anxiety inducing. And I think we all are feeling it, especially in this community, in the queer community. And it's ultimately taking in all the things and then figuring it out because if it gets overturned, the answer is it goes back to the states. That's always the answer. But the problem is that then you run into a situation where if you're traveling in the United States, I literally spoke to an older, he's not that old. He's 50. He's a good friend of mine. He's queer. He's been married for 10 years to his partner. And he was talking about with me how way before he got married, and way before his marriage was even considered legal, and they were vacationing with family in a different state. And he wasn't able to, go in the hospital room when his partner was ill and dying. So that's just kind of the most important piece of this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think being prepared for whatever's going to happen is the number one thing you can do, I think.
If it definitely goes down in the way that I think, unfortunately, it probably will. I'm not a Supreme Court justice. I'm not an expert in law. But with how Roe v. Wade went and how a lot of other things have gone, it's definitely, unfortunately, heading in that direction.
It's been so wonderful to speak to you today, Christina.
Yeah, it's really been lovely to chat with you too, Matilda. Thank you so much for chatting with me.
What about the American public in all of this? What do they think about this issue, this right and its possible scrapping? More from Matilda and a big pile of polling coming up. Matilda, we're talking about gay marriage in the United States because there are fears in some quarters that it's going to be challenged again in their Supreme Court and it could be overturned, maybe with some of the rights, who knows. You sort of hinted earlier about what has changed in the American public's view of all of this. Take us through, according to the polling, where have Americans stood on this issue and where do they stand now?
At the moment, support for same-sex marriage in the US is still very high. About 68% of adults in the US think that same-sex marriages absolutely should be recognised by the law. I have been following this polling for a long time, particularly the Gallup polling, and like most Western countries, support for same-sex marriage in the US has almost only risen since about the early 2000s, and particularly since same-sex marriage became federal law in 2015. But in the last couple of years, it's really dropped off, and you can see that it's primarily driven by Republicans. So I really wanted to dig in to why that was, particularly because it doesn't line up with when Trump first became president. It doesn't line up necessarily with his second presidency. It started to drop during the pandemic, during Biden's presidency. So, I really wanted to look under the hood and see why that was. And there's this amazing polling from a company called PRRI in the US, which asks these kind of social issue questions of thousands of people every year. And it was their data that I found particularly interesting, because what it showed was that the drop-off in support is being driven by young people above all else. Support continues to rise amongst people over 65, but Gen Z, so broadly people aged 18 to 29, now support same-sex marriage less than people in their 30s and 40s do, which I think is a part of this broader trend we're seeing of young people, not just in the States, but also in Europe and the UK, becoming more open to right-wing points of view, following more right-wing influences, and embracing that political stance.
Surprising.
Which is very surprising. And it goes against that conventional wisdom that young people tend to be more left-wing. And it's weirdly becoming more of a social norm to be able to hold that stance. Whereas I think for lots of millennials like myself, you're going against the grain if you don't support same-sex marriage. This kind of slide to the right of our young people, and particularly young men.
And that's the case with the same-sex marriage question in the US. It's the young men who are driving this, but young women are also, that they're tailing off in their support as well.
Yeah, exactly. It is predominantly being driven by young men not supporting same-sex marriage as much anymore.
How stark is the difference between would-be Republican and Democrat voters? Is it quite the split?
So the split between Republican and Democrat voters is now the biggest that it's ever been. So about 68% of US adults think same-sex marriages should be recognised by the law. So for Democrats, that's about 88% who are supportive, whereas Republicans, it's 41%. So it's more than half the support. So it is a really shocking drop.
So even though the headline figure is higher than maybe it was back in 2015 when this was first legalised throughout the states, your point is that if you look at the younger end of the spectrum, particularly those who vote Republican, it is dropping off the support. And I guess that would expand up through the ages as time passed.
Yeah, exactly that. So there's certainly a concern that as people kind of age into voting age, that this trend will continue.
Yeah. And does that go hand in hand, if that's the right word, with what people think about gay relationships? Because it's quite a specific thing, isn't it? Do you agree with gay marriage? You could maybe be broadly pro gays living their life, but you just don't want them getting married.
Yeah, so this also surprised me. Again, in the Gallup polling, they both asked people whether they support same-sex marriage, but also whether they think gay and lesbian relations are morally acceptable. And actually, for Democrats, for Republicans, and for the American public broadly, fewer think that gay relations are acceptable than think that same-sex marriage should be recognised.
Explain that.
Which is really weird. And it's only slightly fewer, but yeah, fewer Americans think being gay is morally acceptable than the number that think that they should be able to get married.
So there might be some people out there who sort of don't think being gay is morally acceptable, but are sort of happy for gay marriages to happen.
Yeah, exactly that.
Go figure. What do you think, though, about what might be influencing that? Because we do have, in the US especially, lots more openly gay politicians. Pete Buttigieg, the former South Bend, Indiana mayor and transport secretary in the Biden administration, is very open about his husband and his kids. Lots of celebrities who are open about their marriages.
Yeah, so experts are pretty divided on this one because in some ways, Trump has been a very kind of pro-LGBT president for a Republican. He's openly said that he supports gay marriage. He's promoted a number of gay officials to very high in the administration. But he's also flipped the other way as well. He's, for instance, cut funding for a suicide prevention hotline specifically for LGBT people. He's been particularly harsh quite often about Pete Buttigieg, particularly about his identity, as have other people in his cabinet, which I think gives some people pause about how far his support actually goes.
And of course, we are not Americans here in the UK, famously. Do we compare in any sense to those trends that you're seeing in the US?
Yeah, so what I found quite interesting in all of this is, obviously, yeah, we are seeing this drop-off in support in the US. I wondered if that was something that would be also happening here, but it's not at all. Support for same-sex marriage in the UK is still only rising. The majority of conservatives think that same-sex marriages should be recognised, and that hasn't dropped off at all. And the same is true for most European countries. Support is only going up. So at the moment, at least, this does seem to be a purely American phenomenon.
Yet again, the US is a special case. So if we've shifts afoot in the population and what they might think about this, we've got a decision potentially approaching the Supreme Court. Has the Supreme Court changed in its mind or how it views these kind of things in the years since 2015 when this decision was last looked at?
Yes, and I think this is in large part what's driving the fear, because even though a majority of Americans support same-sex marriage, if Obergefell gets overturned, it's not going to be down to the American public.
Yes.
It's going to be down to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court now is quite significantly more right-wing than it was in 2015. And of course, in 2015, Obergefell only passed 5 votes to 4, so it was very close then. And Trump has appointed 3 justices to the court who are all very right-wing, some of whom have been openly anti-gay marriage. Of the justices who were in the court during Obergefell, of which 5 are still in the court now, 3 of them wrote dissenting opinions. They voted against it, and 2 of them voted for it. So there is real concern that because of this kind of shift in the court, that could affect the outcome here.
Matilda Davies, data journalist at The Times and The Sunday Times. The story at thetimes.com for any of your thoughts, please. That is it from us today. Today's producer was Shabnam Grewal, executive producer was Edward Drummond, and sound design and theme composition was by Mal Assetto. I'm Luke Jones. See you soon.